Hello everyone, Josh Castle from the Monroe County Public Library here, and I'd like to talk to you today about one of my favorite digital creativity programs. This is called Blender, and it can be obtained on blender.org. Blender is a 3D modeling program by default. What you can do with it is nearly limitless in the range of digital creativity. So that's why it's just one of those excellent things to try out. And no matter your system, whether it's Mac, Windows, or Linux, it'll work on any of those. It'll work on old or new computers. The only limitation is if your system is less powerful, it might take a little bit longer to do what you're trying to do. So you can get the program on blender.org, download here. And one of the great things about this program, once you have it, is it has an excellent support system. So if you're wanting to know how to do anything like select an object, change something, you can go through the support. You can do a basic Google search for whatever you're looking for, and there's lots of good tutorials online on YouTube. So now that I have it installed, I actually had it installed. You just open it up, and you're met with this screen here, which may seem a little complex, but if you kind of dig around and hover over these things, it'll tell you what it does. So we have the sidebar here, which do different things. We have this top bar, which does some different things, and this right bar here. So today, I want to show you probably the most intuitive thing that you can do with Blender, which is sculpting. And sculpting is very intuitive because it works like a 3D paint application, and you can see the effect of whatever you're doing immediately. So to get started, let's hit sculpting on this main menu here. So we have general 2D animation, sculpting, video effects, things like that. Let's hit sculpting, and we start out with a sphere here. So there are some important things to know about the sphere. One is it's not actually a sphere. Now, it may look like a sphere, and you could even argue that it is, but if we zoom in here, you can kind of see these gray little blocks here. And what these are faces. So if we had a cube and we added lots of different faces to it, eventually it'd start becoming a sphere. So if you think about like a square versus, like something with like a million different sides, it's going to start looking very circular because you don't even see the sides anymore, and that's what's happened here. And that's important because whenever you use this sculpting program, what you're really doing is pushing these faces inwards or outwards. So let me show you the faces here. I'm hitting Z on my keyboard. Now I guess I should tell you too, to zoom in and out, it's your mouse wheel. And to pan left or right, you just click that mouse wheel in. You can't really see it because I don't have anything on my sphere, but so I'm going to hit Z here, go to Wireframe, and you can see how many different squares there are on this object. There's so many. To get out of that, we can just hit Z and go to Solid because we want to see the faces. And to start drawing, by default, you're on this handy little thing called Draw. And what we can do is just left click, and you can see that it makes a line on here. Now by default it's set to mirror on one side of what you're doing on the other side. And that's good for sculpting because if you're making a character, generally things are symmetrical. So if we fill this out, we can make some eyes here, we can make a nose, and we can make a mouth. And it makes sense for what we do to the left side to be done on the right side. You can change this. So one of the important things to know about the program, as I said earlier, is kind of to look at your different objects on your screen here. But I'll give you a quick pro tip and let you know that this little gearbox here on the right hand side are general options. So we go in here, down at the bottom, I hope you can see this, it says Symmetry. and by default it's set to X symmetry. So we have X, and then Y, kind of 2D, and then Z, which is up and down. So really you have to think about it like a bar graph. So you have your X going that way, your Y is going this way, which is really flat, and then your Z would be going in actual 3D space from this object up, which is not the same thing as Y. So let's turn off the X-axis mirroring, and remember earlier that it showed that you could see what I did on one side mirrored to the other side. Again, I'm using the scroll wheel to kind of move around here, but say we make something on this side, we draw something, you can see that it didn't happen on this other side. Now, an important thing to note here too is you can always hit Control-Z to undo what you're doing, and you can click on your different mirrors. So let's do a Z mirror so I can kind of show you what that looks like. You can see this little blue dot on the bottom. It's a little hard to see, but on top of his head, I have my cursor here. I'm going to move it around kind of crazily so you can see it. I'm going to draw on the top of his head, and you can see that it's drawn on the bottom because I'm mirroring the Z rather than the X. And you can mirror all sides at once if you wanted to. That gets a little bit more crazy. As you can see, it's doing all this wild stuff now. So I recommend either using no mirroring, mirroring on X, or mirroring on Y. So once again, I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo those things that I did. And kind of zoom in, you can see the details on what I'm working with. And really, that's all the basic knowledge you need to know to make a 3D object. If I wanted to export this, this is a 3D model. I can export this, I can print it out on my 3D printer. It might not look great, but you would have a sphere that had like eyes and a nose and a mouth here. So this is a complete object. And the important thing to know on this is that you have almost endless amounts of tools to kind of play around with this. So there's lots of stuff in this right-hand menu, and that's probably more advanced stuff. What I'd recommend is kind of figuring out these tools on the left first. So let's undo all my drawing here and show you that this is draw. It's just on default. And let's see what Draw Sharp does. Click in there, and you can see it's cutting in rather than out. And now this looks like a much creepier face. I'm going to Control-Z that to get rid of it because that is just not fun to look at. So let's draw a little bit here with Draw again. And you can see that there's this clay tool. This one's a little bit harder to demonstrate. What it does is it kind of it's supposed to do more of like a clay adding effect, and you can kind of see in this this kind of depiction of what it's doing here that it's like adding clay rather than a smooth line drawing. There's strips. A method of sculpting is to slowly add strips of things to things, so it's additive rather than subtractive or destructive. And you're slowly layering on these strips here to make something wider, to make it thicker. There's Layer, which is a really weird tool. I'm not sure that I quite understand it, but it's important to know that it's there. There's Inflate, so say I really liked this weird little ridge. I can inflate it, and you can see as I kind of click and hold down and move up and down over it, I now have this inflated, almost looks like a pig with horns on it. And you can see that that's inflated the object. There's Blob, which you can use to make, surprisingly, blobs. So really, if you just mess around with these, it may not be immediately apparent what they're doing, but they all do something. And by practicing them, you can learn more to do more complex things. So once you've gotten, the drawdown, things like that, start looking at these other things. Look at these complicated tools. Zoom in with your scroll wheel to see what you're doing, and just really experiment. Yeah, you can create nearly anything with this. A lot of people that have made 3D printed objects have used this because it is free, it's easily accessible, and it's installable on any computer. So yeah, now that you have that tool bag in mind, you can really just go off and create what you're wanting to create. Practice these things and then export them. So if you're wanting to make a 3D model, which I think is very popular at our library system for something like a 3D drop-off, you can go to File, and there's an export, and you can see in here if it's there's object, which would work, .obj, but probably most effectively is this .stl, and that's just like a 3D printed object. And if you bring me a crazy creation like this, we could print it out. I mean, if you like the way that it looks, I'm not sure if I love this, but if I sculpted something, I could, do it digitally here and then have something that I created by hand. And this really is only taken minutes. You can take much longer amounts of time, add very small details. You can build on, you can duplicate the object. Really just be aware that there's lots of help and tutorials online. Look on YouTube, look on the Blender website, and there's also help menus throughout this program. So definitely look at those, and come back and watch more of these videos. I think that since Blender is such a complex program that we'll probably be covering it again at some point. But until then, practice up and make me some objects so we can get them 3D printed at the library. Or maybe we can just view them and enjoy the weird creations that we have. Alright, we'll see you in the next one.